My friend Ben is the architect for a new Japanese restaurant, and they had an antique Japanese door that they wanted to frame and make into a wall panel to divide two bar areas within the restaurant. The door is here, and then I'm going to make the frame that's going to hold the door as a panel with a little bit of panel which will be made from the same floor tiles down below, and then a panel up above that'll be plywood and drywall. And this whole frame sits at the end of the bar and allows the light frame that I made in a previous video to die into something at the end of the bar. This is the antique door that we have. It's kind of nice that it's a screen, but it still allows a little bit of light through. You can see a little bit of what's going on behind it, but it really works as a screen. We went around on what kind of wood to use for the frame, and what it really needed to be was very durable, because it was going to be between two bar areas, but also in the main circulation area for the servers. So we decided on oak, because it's not too expensive and it's very durable. The pieces I got had a really large bow in the edge, so I couldn't really run them on the table saw the way they were, and they were too bowed to run on the jointer. So I got out my circular saw and clamped a straight edge, which is a piece of the Z-clip that I've used in the past, down to the piece of wood, and then used that as a track sort of for the circular saw. And this worked pretty well. Once I had a somewhat straight edge, I could run it through the joiner. This is about as big and as heavy as I can run through the joiner. The disc sander table becomes an outfeed table with long pieces. And then once I had a nice straight edge, I could run the piece through the table saw and start to get close to the final dimensions for the piece. This saw I have set up primarily for ripping, and it works really well for that. And then I can do a final joint on the edge and run it through the planer. And then I can run it through on edge through the planer to get the width the same on all the pieces. And start cutting pieces to length. Now, one of the other issues with the wood was that the total frame has to be 14 feet tall to reach from the floor to the ceiling, and I couldn't find 14-foot lengths of oak. So I did a lap joint towards the top. So I laid out the piece to the 14-foot length and clamped it together, and then marked off the part of the wood that I needed to cut off to make the lap joint. And I cut off sort of the bulk of the wood on the bandsaw. My fear at this point was that the radial arm saw really wasn't going to be able to cut through all of that hard oak, which is why I removed most of it with the bandsaw and the radial arm saw. And then I went back and cleaned it up and got it to the final dimensions with the dado set in the radial arm saw. The other thing I needed to do was to cut a dado where the door would be within the frame, so that the door would be held in within the slot of the dado. And doing it this way, I wouldn't have to necessarily attach the door to the frame. The door would be held within the slot of the dado. I can start laying things out to get some lengths mostly, and to figure out where I need to cut across dado to hold the frame together. So this slot will take the horizontal piece of the frame, and I'll cut these to length, and then you can see how that'll fit together. Now, the door was missing a few nails, which the dealer at the antique shop found a few extra nails in a drawer that he had, so I put those in. And I did a little sanding of the inside of the frame. That would be hard to once the frame was together. And then I started putting things together. And I started with the door sort of as the center, and then worked from that center outward. And then the lap joints can go together. I just used some glue and some screws to hold the joints together. So what I figured out structurally with this was to hold everything together with the panel at the top and the bottom, so that the joints in the oak really weren't doing the work of holding the system together. So I made a wood frame to fit into the upper panel, and then that frame would get attached to the oak from the inside. First with a few finish nails just to sort of hold it in place, and then some screws to really lock it into place. On the face of these two panels would be plywood, so that with the frame and the plywood, it basically makes a torsion box, which is very, very light and very strong. So the oak and the door end up being held together by the plywood torsion box at the top and the bottom. And I'll put some screws into the plywood, and it's basically put together at this point. Now I had my friend Ben come over to help move it into the truck, and then from there I could strap it down and get it ready to drive to the restaurant. I left one of the panels off on the bottom so that they could attach the bottom to the floor through the frame. And we're off to the restaurant. I had the guys at the restaurant unload the truck. This was a big help. And bring the panel into the restaurant. And then about 2 months later, I went back to see it installed and in place. It seems to work pretty well. It separates the server circulation from the seating area really well. And it turned out really nice. Thanks for watching.